my world just got a little bit bigger. Is the last line to Chapter 1 of Rocksalt, Strange Encounters, a light novel by William Amir Stevens. This is the cover. The art before the cover is done by Douglas Troyer Jr. I hope I got that last name correct. Now, obviously, I can't say too much about the story yet because I've only read the first chapter, but I'm telling you, if you are somebody who doesn't like slow stories, you just want the action to start right away, shit hits the fan by the end of this chapter. And it's a short chapter. You can probably read it in like 2 minutes. And if you like the Old West, if you like monsters and ghouls and witches of the like, if you have been searching for a story written by a POC with a lead POC who also happens to be an independent author, and this is the light novel for you. This is the story for you. I think I'm gonna love this. I don't want to call it a problem because it's not a problem. It's like a personal preference thing, and it's an issue with the way my mind works and not with the story itself. Is that it is written as though it were a screenplay as opposed to a novel, and for whatever reason, I've always had trouble reading screenplays. So keep that in mind if, like me, you struggle with that. I still definitely recommend giving this a shot. I know I'm gonna finish it, and I've got the second one on deck. If you're ever gonna judge a book by its cover, let it be this one, because it looks fucking beautiful. Anyway, I can't wait to finish the story. I'll be doing chapter by chapter updates to let you guys know what I think so far. So make sure you smash that plus button to hear my thoughts. And please, link below. Buy the fucking book. Alright, Rocksalt, Chapter 2. Y'all want to hate a villain in a single sentence? One leg of a living baby. That's how Chapter 2 starts. With Bruja Betty, our antagonist for this chapter, maiming a child in order to create a spell. Chapter 2 is really fun, though, regardless of that. We get into a harrowing fight between Jebediah and Bruja Betty. We learn that Betty has the ability to make herself look human, but it requires her to maintain concentration on a specific spell, which Jebediah inadvertently breaks upon shooting her in the face with Rocksalt.
That'll do it.
And this is when Jebediah realizes that things in this world are not as they seem. You would have thought he would have realized that in Chapter 1 when a zombie attacked him. Excuse me. They call them ghouls in this story, but they're zombies. The fight choreography in this chapter is really well done. You can easily visualize what's happening and where everybody is in the scene. It's great. I love a good fight scene in a book. A couple of things that I'm gonna probably try not to bring up too often throughout this book is I'm not a fan of casual racism in my fantasy. I give a little bit of allowance in this story for 2 reasons. One, we're reading a story that is post-Civil War America. So narratively it makes sense. And 2, it's going to piss off some of my paler complexion audience.
So,
if you're going to write a story involving racism and about the trials of a black man in America, it should definitely be written by a black person.
that's fair.
Overall, this chapter was really fun. You realize that this world is far darker and mysterious than you would think for a Western-style story. If you're into the Old West, if you like stories like that, and you also happen to be a supernatural girly, I think you're really going to enjoy the story. So make sure you go check out Rocksalt's page and pick up a copy of Rocksalt, Strange Encounters. Rocksalt, Chapter 3. Fucking get a wiggle on, kid! Might be the funniest line I've read so far. I don't know why, it tickles me telling someone to get a wiggle on. I've never heard that phrase before. It's fucking great. Chapter 3 is the continuation and completion of Jebediah's fight with Bruja Betty. We learn a little bit about Bruja Betty and perhaps her species, race, not sure what to call her yet. As a whole, like the fact that she is weak against iron and that her magic has limits. She can only use it for so long before it starts to drain her and she has to resort to physical combat, which is what we see here in chapter 3. We also learn, I think we learned something about Jebediah. He seems to be faster, or at least have higher reflexes than you would expect from the average human, which makes my mind think that we're going to learn a lot about Jebediah's character and who he is and what he's capable of as the story progresses, and I cannot wait to figure out, or to find out, how much I am correct about and how much I get wrong. Shut up.
No.
But Jebediah overcomes Bruja Betty, knocks her out in honestly what is kind of a hilarious way. I won't spoil anything, but it's pretty hilarious how he wins this fight. He manages to save one of the 2 children that Bruja Betty had locked away in her cabin. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but one of the children does get unalived in a fairly gruesome way. So be warned, 2 things here. If you don't like depictions and descriptions of gruesomeness, and if you have a hard time dealing with bad things happening to children, this chapter might be a little rough, and I've got to imagine that those themes are going to carry throughout the whole story and perhaps the whole series. I can't confirm that because I'm not the writer, but just be aware going in that this stuff does happen. Jebediah ties Bruja Betty up and drags her witchy ass back to town, where we then move into chapter 4, I think. End of chapter 3, beginning of chapter 4, we meet back up with a character named Bill, who starts the beginning of the explanation about the world of cryptids and monsters to Jebediah. Gives him the tools he needs to make sure he's safe from Bruja Betty as he transports her wherever he needs to transport her to, as well as a book that he can use to reference whenever he comes across any new and strange creatures that he doesn't understand. Unfortunately for Jebediah, things take a pretty nasty turn almost immediately after he defeats Bruja Betty. If you want to find out more about that, smash that like button. Make sure you go give Rocksalt some love. Pick up your copy of Rocksalt, Strange Encounters by the amazing William and Meir Stevens, and I'll catch you on the next one. Rocksalt, Chapter 5. What would you do as a black man in post-Civil War America, traveling the country, in the South, mind you, with a white woman tied up in the back of your wagon, when you suddenly find yourself surrounded by a bunch of white highwaymen? Figure you got 2 ways to handle this. You can run, or you can fight. And apparently Jebediah wakes up every goddamn morning and chooses violence. Because we're on chapter 5, and this man has been in more fights than I have my entire life. Once again, the fighting choreography in this is really well done. Once again, we get to see how much better Jebediah seems to be than everybody else he encounters. Which again leads me to believe that there's something hinky going on with our boy Jebediah here. There's something going on here. So we resolve that issue only to immediately be in the middle of a shootout. And I don't even know how to explain the things he does in this fight that frankly should leave him in the dirt. But here we are. If nothing else, the fights in this story are going to be worth it. But we also get a level of mystery here when Jebediah finds out that these men were hired to come after him. The bounty hunter has become the bounty. And then we meet the man with 3 names. And this is where we get into chapter 6. And, now, I don't have a lot to say about Chapter 6, which is why I'm doing it in the Chapter 5 video as well, but I do want to introduce you to one of the best villain names I've ever heard. And this man absolutely tried to a president at one time. Thaddeus Theodore Thompson. That is our man with 3 names. And I'm not sure who he is yet. I don't know if he's the big bad. I don't know if he's just the next monster of the week or what. All I know is he's got one question for Jebediah. Where is my witch? Rocksalt, Chapter 7. Chapter 7 opens up with Jebediah in a bit of a pickle as he wakes up in a jail cell across from what is, I think, going to be my favorite character, Klaus. Now, Klaus has a much longer, difficult to pronounce name that I'm not even going to attempt because I can barely get through this video as is. But it should be noted that so far he's hated the nickname. The reason I think that this is going to be my favorite character is mostly because of the image you're looking at now. It is gorgeous. I love the black and white with just that pop of red coming out, making me wonder, what in the fuck is this pacifist about to get up to? Because Klaus is a self-proclaimed pacifist. He tells us that immediately before slashing a dude's neck open. Which is your friendly reminder that if you're not capable of great harm, you're not a pacifist. You're just harmless. Klaus seems like he's going to be a really amazing character. You get to see a lot from him within the next 2 chapters. I'll go a little bit more in detail when I do my review of Chapter 8. But the main point of this chapter is getting Klaus and Jebediah together, breaking out of jail, and starting to just absolute demolish some of their guards. You also learn a little bit about the unsavory experimentation that is going on people who are, as Klaus would put it, of Jebediah's complexion. And you also learn a little bit about goblin culture as a whole. Some notable things about this chapter. Klaus refers to himself as a goblin, but also refers to goblins as part of the Fae overall. The reason I bring this up is because those of you who are Fae purists are going to be real annoyed about that. And I need you to just not. Cool? Cool. Overall, I'm still really loving this story. I cannot wait to get through it. I know it is taking me a horrendous amount of time for something that is only 100 and some odd pages, but I'm working on it. If you want to experience the story yourself, make sure you go over to Rocksalt's page and pick it up from the TikTok shop. I am the specter that manipulates dreams into malicious nightmares. I am the envoy of calamity. I am your master. So the first lines from our villain, Thaddeus, also known as T, from Rocksalt, Chapter 8, pictured here. There's my wife.
The tag was sticking out, it was bugging me.
This was a fun chapter. I really enjoyed this. We got to see Japanimir's ability to really write a cohesive combat narrative between more than one other person. We got to see him showcase his ability to write combat abilities outside of the general run-of-the-mill shoot-em-ups and fisticuffs. Yes, I use the word fisticuffs. It feels appropriate for a Western. Leave me alone. We also get our first look at real powerful magic. We got a little bit with Betty, but hers seemed to be a little bit lackluster owing to the fact that she drained herself relatively quickly. With Thaddeus and Klaus both, we get to see a real showcase of what is possible with the power within this world, and I found that really intriguing. I cannot wait to see more. I love the concept that he came up with about a quick and dirty way for people to learn new magic if they're willing to do some fairly deplorable things to people who may or may not deserve it. Overall, I think this is where I'm going to say the story really starts to get good. It was good before, don't get me wrong, but if somebody were to ask me to open up to a random chapter to read to them, to pull them into this story, this is the chapter I would start with, I think. If you are interested in westerns, if you're interested in cryptids, if you're interested in hidden worlds and stuff like that in your stories, make sure you check out Rocksalt's page so that you can get your own copy of Rocksalt Strange Encounters, a light novel by William Amir Stevens. Alright, so it's only taken me about 6 months, but we're finally back here for a Rocksalt Strange Encounters review. A light novel written by William Amir Stevens, cover art done by Douglas Troy Jr. Click here if you want to check out Chapter 8's review. Otherwise, let's get into Chapter 9, where I'm going to start by reading a couple of excerpts. On a hilltop overlooking the fort, two red and gold cloaked figures watch as Jebediah and crew attempt to run from the waves of flame, expanding from the epicenter of the fireball. The hoods of the cloaked figures cover their faces, hiding them from the world. Their eyes glow with an intense purple hue. The two stand there, ominously, watching. The reason this sticks out to me personally is because it brings to mind the opening scene from The Mummy, where Brendan Fraser as Rick O'Connell is running into the desert after narrowly surviving an attack by an opposing force, right? And you've got can't remember the name that they give them in the show, but it's the dudes whose job it is to stop the mummy from rising. They're bad at their job, by the way. But they're watching him run into the desert. And that's just the image that fills my mind. And I thought that was really cool. And was only a tiny bit bummed out to find out that Japanimir did not intend for that to be the image that came to mind. But I still love it. The next excerpt comes from a little bit later. The badly burned, mangled man is T, in his left hand carrying his severed right leg. He tries to balance as he reattaches his leg. Noticing the watchers, he reaches out to them, channeling his lightning, and electrocutes them to dust. He then speaks. They don't need to know of this just yet. I love this because if you saw Chapters 8 review, you understand that T, or Thaddeus as we know him, is a villain that he immediately is just incredibly menacing, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And the fact that he is able to crawl out of this flaming pit, heal himself, and still have the power to decimate two opponents into dust, and then just deliver that cold ass line, that tells me that this guy, he's gonna be tough to take down. Like I said, beyond that, in Chapter 9, we really just get some exposition, some good lore, and it sets up for what I think is going to be really interesting reveals. I'm still not convinced that Jebediah doesn't have more going on with him than just being human, although the author has told me I'm wrong. However, I am very rarely wrong about these things, so we'll see what happens in Book 2 and 3, which I hear is coming out faster than I apparently am able to read the books. Anyway, stay tuned for my Chapter 10 review, as well as my overall thoughts on the book as a whole. Rocksalt, Chapter 10, the final chapter of Strange Encounters, a light novel written by William Amir Stevens, cover art done by Douglas Troy Jr. Chapter 10, I think, is a great way to end this book. We get introduced to a couple of new characters, as well as a potential and more than likely secondary long-term villain that our protagonist Jebediah is going to have to contend with throughout his stories. We also learn that there's more to his girlfriend that meets the eye, as well as a handful of other side characters that only tangentially get introduced in this chapter. I don't want to say too much about this because I think the reveal of who this new enemy is really unique and is going to resonate with a lot of people, specifically people who have since left their various religions. Overall, Jebediah is an intriguing character. Klaus is going to be fun as hell to watch grow, and he says shit like whammo blammo when pretending to shoot shotguns, which I think should be put on a shirt. Personally, Japanimir, get on that. You've got books, you need merch. Whammo blammo. Anyway, Japanimir is a good author. I cannot wait to see his skills as an author grow and develop over time. He's got a very good story here, and I cannot wait to get into the next book, as well as get into the third one when I get around to buying it, because I will not let this man give me another book for free, because my ADHD makes me incapable of sticking to a goddamn timeline. Anyway, stay tuned for my overall feelings of the book, and make sure you check out Japanimir and or Rocksalt here on TikTok. 6 months later, some self-deprecation humor, and about 37 fucking takes later, I have finally finished Rocksalt Strange Encounters, a light novel by William Amir Stevens, cover art done by Douglas Troyer Jr. This video is going to be my overall thoughts of the book as a whole. If you're interested in seeing my thoughts on a chapter-by-chapter breakdown, you can see the first video here. I will also compile these and post them to my YouTube, which you can see here. Now, Rocksalt, overall, I think is a very fun story. It is a hidden world type story that takes place in a post-Civil War South America, or Southern America. And our protagonist is Jebediah, a black man who fought for the Union in the Civil War with a partner named Klaus, who is a goblin. And we are introduced to both of these characters taking part in some harrowing events. Jebediah is trying to save 2 children from the witch, Bruja Betty, and Klaus is a prisoner of our antagonist, Thaddeus, or T, as he is called within the story. It is, thus far, a phenomenal story. The way the magic works is unique and intriguing. It's not something I personally have ever seen before. So much so that I'm going to leave it to Japanimir himself to explain to people, because I don't fully understand it yet, although I'm going to work on that. There are things in this story that I'm not a fan of, but there are things that I'm not a fan of in any story. That's mostly to do with the just existence of racism. That's just me, though. I don't think using racism in story is a good way to tell a story. However, in this context, given the time and place that this story takes place in, and the fact that it is written through the lens of a person of color, it actually does work really well, and it's not as in your face as some other stories would have it be. Like, the racism is not the crux of the conflict. The racism is just there because it exists in this world, the same way it exists in our world. I think it was a really tasteful way to incorporate that into the story and still be able to tell a story that doesn't use it as a crutch. I hope that makes sense. Overall, I think Japanimir, William Amir Stevens, that is going to grow as a phenomenal author. I think he's got some very, very strong talents here, and I cannot wait to see what he gives us next. I've already got book 2 that I need to start reading and making reviews of, so if you want to see my chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of that one, make sure you smash that plus button, and stay tuned for that. In general, I give this story a solid 3.5, 4 out of 10, knocking off a couple of points for personal opinions about how to use things like racism in stories. Other than that, I can't wait to see where the story goes and how the art develops, because this next book has pictures, and I love me some pictures. Anyway, make sure you follow Japanimir to stay up to date with his story, and make sure you follow me to stay up to date with my reviews.